Exempted Village Board of Education special meeting for Tuesday, November 24th at 5 o'clock is called to order. This meeting is with section 3313.15 revised code. Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mrs. Briner,
Here.
Mr. Buckley, Mrs. Hassan,
Here.
Ms. Jisling,
Present.
Mr. Tuttle.
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America
and to the
and to the
republic
republic
which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one nation under God, indivisible,
visible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and justice
justice
for all.
for all.
This meeting is being video conferenced live and can be accessed at youtube.com/user Cardinal TV Mentor, Ohio. Next on the agenda is the Chief Financial Officer's report and recommendations. Mr. Wilson.
Yes, we're here this evening to have a recommendation to approve the fiscal projections for 2020-21 through 2024-25. The projections were presented to the Finance Committee for review prior to this meeting, and they agreed that with the recommendation that it be presented to the board for approval. I would like to just highlight a couple things if I may, and then if there are questions, we can certainly discuss those. That we are required to approve a forecast no later than the end of November and file it with the Ohio Department of Education. So hopefully the board will be agreeable to approving tonight, and then we'll be in compliance.
Dan,
yes.
excuse me, before you move forward, I got an email update from you today that was like 90 pages, so I didn't print that. And then we got this work session workbook in the mail. Has anything changed from this, or can we follow along on this one?
You should have gotten previously the fiscal projections. Some of it's in there, but I will, I thought we had sent the actual fiscal projection book to your home.
Maybe I've got something separate here. Let me look.
Yes, the actual fiscal projections book is, I'm looking, 62 pages long.
2 pages?
62? You know, I didn't get it. Was it electronic?
I know we sent it electronically.
Electronic, I think.
Okay, it was just electronic. I
believe
apologize.
so.
I will.
Was that the one we got today?
No, it was
92 pages.
Yeah, no, it was a while ago, and the emails, it was an attachment, and in the mail it said if you wanted a hard copy, you were to request it from Jackie.
Okay.
Well, what we can do, if Mike is still available, we can put it up on the screen for viewing, and so I can have the visual of the some of the exhibits. And Mike, are you
That
still
would be
there?
helpful.
And I am. The only thing is the one that you sent today is the 92-page one. Is that the one you want me to open up?
Let's go ahead.
Okay, I will. I'm going to work on getting that if you want to keep going. And then
Okay.
once
Thank
you start talking about it, I will share my screen and get you to the correct pages.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mike.
1 second, and I'll bring that up as
Okay.
you're talking through it.
As Mike's bringing it up, as I've done every year, I rely on guidance from the Board of Education policies and also work with the superintendent to get input on staffing levels and any major initiatives. This year's fiscal projections, I networked with a lot of colleagues and spent a lot of drive time thinking about this year, and kind of arrived at developing the fiscal projections, assuming that the COVID-19 crisis would end at the end of this fiscal year and the future 4 years would be normal years. I did that so that we had a baseline to work from, and I do have an exhibit with 2 what-if scenarios. What if the COVID-19 crisis extended all of next year, And what if the COVID-19 crisis extended for 6 months of the next year to help give us some changes there? That's it, Mike. So that was a fundamental assumption that I made. The second one that was a little more challenging than in past years, if you can keep going down a little bit, Mike, page 1, yes, was a judgment on the economy. As I've noted for the last 2 years, we're in a very abnormal economic climate. The Great Recession of 2007 was the deepest recession since the Depression, and the recovery's been the slowest prolonged recovery since the Depression. And while the COVID-19 impact has had some interesting challenges for the economy in general, as well as the geopolitical climate that our country's going through, I made an assumption that there would not be another recession throughout the fiscal projections. And again, I'll state what I always state. I try to make the most reasonable assumptions possible and hoping that leads to accurate assumptions. But if I knew with certainty what was going to happen on June 30th of 2025, I'd own an island and have my own country and you wouldn't hear from me. So, there is uncertainty trying to go that far in the future. So those were two fundamental decisions I made in addition to the normal ones. This year, we show a relatively strong need to talk about new revenue in most likely calendar year 2023. And I'll get to that in a little bit. We continue to be guided, as you see on that screen, with the various plans, long-term plans that we have and our fiscal beliefs. We continue to embrace those. On page 4, just to review some of the most significant individual assumptions. Again, I talked about the COVID crisis and the economy. Next was an assumption of inflation rates, and I used a 3% inflation rate as a placeholder, recognizing our market basket is different from the consumer price index. And I used the 2019 enrollment study by FutureThink that Bill had commissioned and adjusted their numbers to this year's actual. So I took their predicted year-over-year change and applied it to this year's actual. And you'll see there that we basically have flattened out, which we have been expecting for a number of years now. And that part of our success in extending levy cycles was incrementally adjusting staffing to declining enrollment, including some closing of buildings, but we've now kind of reached that flat place where that opportunity no longer exists for us. We're also assuming no new unfunded mandates. We know there'll be a 0% increase in healthcare on January 1st of 2021, but I continue to assume an 8% increase, which is consistent with the inflation rate in the Great Lakes region for the out years. We continue to assume special education costs will grow at 1.5 times the assumed rate of inflation, and that energy costs will grow at their own unique annual rates.
Dan, quick question. Will the census information that should be completed sometime in the near future, will that have any impact on our projection for enrollment?
No. The enrollment study that was done was based on live births within the geographic boundaries of the district, regression analysis as far as grade level to grade level movement, looking at known and planned future residential developments that might cause some residential movement and new school age students. But from a census standpoint, we weren't sensitive to that. And the same with the others. Our federal funding is tied to identified students that are economically challenged or have special needs more so than just the total number of students. So we did not assume any impact from a potential change in numbers from the census.
Thank you so much.
All right, and page 7 is something you've seen before. It was in the budget book, but it's the fiscal impact of the COVID-19 crisis, showing kind of a bottom line last year of reduced income, increased spending, some reduced spending, certain categories. If you go down just a little bit, Mike, to the bottom number there, there we go. The 3,144,000 was the net negative impact last year. This year's budget assumes a negative impact of 7,603,195. And again, our baseline is assuming that there'll be no impact next year. Page 9 is kind of an interesting one. And while it's not tied to the census, Jenny, it does go to your question, I think. And that's the right there, the percent of resident students that are enrolled in private schools. The high water mark was 2005, 2006, where 19.2% of our students were attending private schools or charter schools. This past year, that's dropped to 10.2%. And I think it's a reflection of two things. One is the quality of instruction and our commitment to instructional technology that puts us in a much different place than many of the more traditional teaching and learning models. And secondly, there is some economic impact as far as ability to fund private school tuition. So this information was factored into those enrollment projections, but it's kind of interesting that we've seen a drop almost in half of the number of students not attending our schools. On page 11, this year's staffing adjustment, again, it's the same as what you saw in the budget book. The numbers in blue reflect the COVID-19 one-year staffing numbers, and we assumed that all those one-year contracts would not be renewed after this year. However, there was permanent staffing increases of 5 positions, which we assumed would continue. On page 21, we always provide a timeline of items that impact the fiscal projections. And I go all the way back to July of 2006 when the board adopted the policies that guide the development, and then some significant events that have funding implications. And in the middle of the page there, you'll see May 7, 2013, we renewed for 10 years a current operating levy that's producing almost $12 million a year in revenue to the district that will be up for renewal in 2023. So again, as we talk about future revenue needs, we'll have 2 discussions, one on renewing that levy, and I assume that levy would be renewed for purpose of projection, and the potential need for new revenue. The individual assumptions on revenue, the only thing I would highlight is we have a 3-year statistical triennial update on tax values in 2022 and a 6-year reappraisal in 2025. I used historical averages and assumed a 5% increase in residential values, a 2% increase in commercial values, and a $650,000 increase in public utility, and factor that into the numbers. Again, I assume state funding would return to the norm before the COVID-19 crisis. And on page 26 is a summary of the numbers that shows the year-over-year change, that In 2021, we're showing a decrease of 3.99%. And if you'll recall from the budget adoption, that's because of the unusually high collection of taxes in 1920 that we didn't expect to repeat. And then normalizing the 3 years out, as we historically see, revenue remains fairly flat in the out years after normalizing for that one item. So on the page 29, there's a secret oath all of us treasurers take that you have to have a pie chart in every presentation. So the obligatory pie chart. But what's important here is if you look at local real estate taxes and income tax reimbursement, the homestead and rollback payments is funded out of residents' money. 80.4% of our revenue comes from local sources and 14.3% comes from the state of Ohio. So we are very dependent on funding our locally our quality education. Statewide, that splits about 60% local, 40% state. So Great Lakes Mall area, other areas in town, Tyler Boulevard, we have a very strong commercial tax base compared to many communities. On the expense side, on page 34, again, we've touched on it, but the key variables are how many students are we going to educate, how many staff members do we have, and you'll see there the numbers that we referred to a moment ago on enrollment. And then we are assuming after the return to a normal year, no change in staffing in any years. With enrollment flat and consulting with Bill, we believe that the current staffing level would be the appropriate level to assume in the future. The inflation rate that I touched on, salary and wages, we assume it's a fundamental decision, again, that all treasurers make, and I try to be very realistic in my assumptions. To assume there would be no pay increase, I don't believe is realistic. There are many districts that will assume zero to put some extra fiscal tension into collective bargaining. I have always assumed some type of rate adjustment based on the historical norms in our district and the area. We did put in an annual increase of 2%. And I must stress, and the board knows this, that is simply a placeholder. It's no indication of what a settlement may look like with the two bargaining units, but rather recognizes that it's probably not going to be zero. On page 41 is kind of the bottom line year over year change as we saw with revenue. And again, we see two abnormal years. This year, the 12.4% increase is the COVID-19 crisis. When that goes away, we have a normalization that takes us minus 1.85. And then the normal out years, 4.13, 3.73, 4.16. That average annual growth rate of 4% is a little bit higher than national average, but again, I think it's reflective of the high quality programming that we do. Again, my second pie chart is on page 44, and there's a couple structural tests for any budget or fiscal projections. And the one is that if you spend more than 80% of your budget on salary and benefits, there's not enough money for the other critical fixed costs and necessary support costs. And you'll see here our salaries and benefits are 75.9%. So we're comfortably inside that safety range. And the second one is what percent of our budget is spent on instruction. And again, we are comfortably within the range we're about 66%. And again, the target is 65% or more should be spent.
Hey, Dan,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I recall at one time before fiscal emergency, the standard amount or the acceptable amount of salaries and benefits, I thought was about 85%. Am I wrong
No.
with that?
When we
Was
were
that a
going
number?
into fiscal crisis, that's right, because if you recall, as part of the crisis, we had a staffing adjustment of over 220 people reduction. And if you go back to the 5 years before the fiscal crisis, we had declining enrollment, but growing staffing. And that led to that structural imbalance that was another indicator of, something's not right. And I don't think that was something emphasized in documents the board received prior to my arrival and my format on that. But your recollection is right. In fact, I just got the numbers here. From 99 to our fiscal crisis in 2004, we actually added 76 staff members. And at the same time, let me see here, we had a decline in students of about 300 students. Or I'm sorry, it was 1,200 students. So again, structurally, we were out of balance there, and that very important indicator.
I thought so. I remember that correctly, didn't I? Yep.
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, since we've been on the board, we've watched it steadily come down.
Yes.
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
right.
And again, that was a lesson learned in the fiscal crisis, the need to incrementally adjust staffing to number of students,
Yeah.
which the board's been very diligent in doing over the years. And now, again, that we've kind of flattened out from an enrollment standpoint, there'll be less sensitivity to that, but also less opportunities to reduce spending. And that's why you're seeing the year-over-year growth go up in the neighborhood of 4% a year.
Dan, with the lame duck session at the state level, do you anticipate any in their funding formula for us?
If the lame duck session, if the so-called Cup-Patterson or Fair School Funding Plan has been introduced as House Bill 305 and Senate Bill 376. I've been advocating for that since it was introduced a couple years ago. And if that were to be enacted, there's right now a proposed 6-year phase-in for that program, but it would provide us an additional $400,000 a year during the phase-in time period. So it would be very beneficial to the district over time.
Thank you.
We have not assumed that that passage would occur. That would certainly be a positive if it did. But even if it is enacted, the phase-in period is very much in question, whether or not the state has the resources to commit to a 6-year phase-in or if it might be a longer phase-in.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and if we can go to page 47, it's one of the kind of getting to the bottom line. There we go. As you've heard me say before, and I joke with the finance committee, years ago when I was the treasurer for our church, it wasn't as elaborate as this booklet, but I got a little carried away with doing the budget and financial statements, and the governing board and the pastor pulled me aside and said, look, all we want to know is how much should we start with? How much should we take in? How much should we spend? And praise the Lord if there's anything left. So I've tried to get to that kind of bottom line for us. And the first bottom line is on page 47. And as the board knows, we have established through board policy a formal general fund operating reserve, which statutorily cannot exceed 5% of previous year revenue, and then also established a cash set aside of an additional 10% to meet the national standard of best practice of 15% cash reserve for unexpected contingencies. And it used to be if someone said, well, what's unexpected? I would point to Willoughby Eastlake and say, like the board building burnt down. Now I think we all would point to COVID-19 crisis and say, if you recall the pages, over 3 million hit last year, over a $7 million hit this year. That's again part of the best practice of having reserves. Most importantly, the available cash balance, you see red numbers at the bottom, 23, 24, 563,000 red, and the following year, 25,488,000 deficit. In Ohio, we are not allowed to have deficit budgets. Both the state of Ohio and all local governments, including school districts, must balance their budgets. So that's important for us to talk about it. Now, one of the things we often talk about is, well, okay, Wilson, you're always conservative, so it's not going to be as bad as you say. And I hope that's right. And on page 52 is what I refer to every year as my grade card. My grade card is my percent of accuracy. And it started with the Finance Committee, and the board certainly agreed with the Finance Committee that I needed to sharpen my pencil, if you would. And if you scroll down more towards the bottom there, over the last 2 years, I've reported that we refined our methodology and formulas on both the revenue side and expense side. And you'll see historically, since I joined the district, my accuracy rate's been 96.2 on revenue and 96% on expenses. The last 2 years after sharpening the pencil, my accuracy rate is over 98.5% on revenue and about just a little over 98% on expenses. So we believe we're more accurate. And again, I'm hesitant, even though the last 6 years, we've not had an increase in healthcare. I was hesitant to project no increase in healthcare for 4 years. Just as I'm hesitant to project that we're always going to have a very significant delinquent tax collections in addition to current taxes due on revenue. But looking at this page, and I'll use very round numbers, that even if, say I'm 1.5% to 100% accuracy on revenue, and another 1.5% on expenses, that's 3%. 3% on about $120 million is 3.6 million a year. So even if you factor in that conservative factor, it's not going to eliminate that $25 million projected deficit in 24-25. So I think.
And I have one question regarding COVID-19 and the vaccinations. Is that going to be a program that is provided by the federal government or by the state, or will our healthcare have to pay for those immunizations for the vaccines for staff?
That's something that has not been finally determined. Most of the information I've been getting from our consultants and from Medical Mutual suggest it may be partially funded at the federal level. The emphasis at the federal level seems to be more those that are Medicaid eligible, the older population that are at a higher risk. The state of Ohio, I think, is deferring to see what happens at the federal level and wants to avoid further budget cuts. So I'm not sure they're going to fund it. So there is a likelihood that it could have some funding impact fall through our current healthcare provider, Medical Mutual. And again, you know, the great unknown there is we pick up a new expense in the vaccination, but if it avoids COVID-19 illness and expenses to treat that illness, is it a wash? So we're fortunate that we're comfortably funded on the healthcare side and would be able to absorb, even if there were the cost, hopefully one-time cost from that. But that's something where in January, I sit on the Medical Mutual Advisory Council, and that's the number one topic for our January meeting, is kind of getting a better understanding of how the vaccine will be deployed, if there's targeted population groups first. You know, in our world, I've read a lot in publications advocating that school employees should be at the top of the list because of so many children that are exposed every day. So, you know, who gets it and who pays for it is very much on everyone's mind, but unfortunately, we don't have a clear answer yet.
I agree with you. It's money well spent if it can avoid, you know, illness for somebody, just like any vaccine. So thank you.
Yes. Page 53 is that what if scenarios that I referred to in talking with Bill. You know, we said, what if COVID continues a year? And Bill studied it up and came to the conclusion that some of the money we spent, a significant amount, were for one-time things. The spray machines for sanitizing the buildings, were installing special equipment on the air handlers that purify the air. It's on page 53. And so our ongoing expense would not be as great. So in this case, I did a what if the COVID crisis continues for all of 2021 of $4 million, and our deficit would go up again in the out year by that $4 million to $29,488,000. And then the second what if we only had the COVID crisis for a half of the year, or $2 million, the deficit would go to $27,488,000. Even factoring in my conservative nature, in 24-25, we would not be able to legally adopt a budget because we would be in a deficit. So clearly going forward, we need to discuss not only renewing the current levy, but when and how much for a new levy. And if you may recall from 2016, a key decision point for the board is weighing how big a levy to ask for, and that determines when you ask. Obviously, the longer you wait, the bigger the millage amount and the cost to homeowners. The sooner you go, the lower the millage rate, the lower the cost to homeowners. So that's a key dynamic for us to wrestle with. Back in 2016, I commissioned a special study by a state expert on what's the sweet spot for approving levies in school districts in the state of Ohio, new operating levies particularly. And as you would guess, the lower the millage rate, the more likely it is for the community to approve it. And the sweet spot was between 4 and 6 mills. So again, as we go forward here in the next year or two and begin to think about it, that's one of those key dynamics as we understand more about, will the COVID-19 crisis go away? Will we be able to go back to normal operations? That will be an important discussion. Also knowing, and I just saw the report earlier today, and I'll get it out to the board, this November, new school district operating levies, the passage rate was around 35%. Last year, even before COVID-19, well, the early stages, the passage rate was around 44%. The passage rate of new levies has been below 50% for the last half dozen years. So certainly we have challenges. We're blessed that we have a great story to tell. The high quality education we provide, how well Bill and the administrative team's been able to navigate through this crisis has been very significant, and I think very much appreciated by the community as a whole. And so the open issues there, page you see with Mike, is the normal items, the renewal levy in 23, the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. We still have to determine the future of the James A. Garfield building and the potential carrying cost. And we'll have new collective bargaining agreements to negotiate next spring. So we have some significant items coming up that will have an impact on future budgets and fiscal projections. With that, I think I've highlighted everything I needed to touch upon. Happy to answer any other questions, and then I'll ask the board to approve the fiscal projections and authorize me to file them with the Ohio Department of Education.
Yeah, Dan, I have a question, and it's not too major, but regarding the COVID-19 continuing expenses,
Yes.
even after COVID is, let's say, solved,
Yes.
do we have some best practices that were currently now instituted that we want to carry forward? And I don't mean plastic around the desks and all the shields and things, but the sanitizing and the network of communicating. I don't know how much cost is related to that. I think we have developed some really good practices, best practices that we may want to continue after COVID is inoculated.
Well, I'll take an early stab at it and ask Bill. He's our expert on it. But two things that were a one-time investment that I think will continue without new annual expense. One is the devices that help sanitize the buildings right now on Wednesdays, but it could be the evenings where the sprayers that due to special chemicals, there was an investment to buy the equipment to be able to do that. And then we have a major project right now that we're bidding out to put air purifiers on all the air handlers throughout the school district. And once they're installed, other than some incremental electrical costs to run them, there's no other cost. So those are two significant one-time spends that will have a very positive impact on extra sanitation that we didn't really think a lot about before the crisis. So Bill, I'm sure there's other things I missed, but those are two that came to mind for me.
So if we're doing some extra sanitation, for instance, what could balance that out would be if we have better attendance among our employees, because we have better strategies to mitigate the cold and flu season, things of that nature. So
Good.
It's going to be hard to say. The biggest cost associated with this one time was the investment in extra staffing for this year that especially impacted our elementary schools and allowed us to spread out our students at that critical 6-foot distance and spread them out into the classrooms around our buildings, taking up almost every learning space. So it's for this 1 year, at least this point in time, we don't know if it goes part or all of next year. Would we need to continue that? That's where I think Dan building in a couple of those other scenarios will help us understand. So there could be some things, could be some pros and cons to the different strategies. But to your point, we've learned a lot from this year, not just about COVID, but I think just about health and sanitation going forward.
Good. Okay, that's excellent. I think that'll help us if this happens again. Let's say COVID-20 or COVID-21 comes around. Put us in a better position of good practice.
No.
Well, you never know what'll happen in 4 years. So let's just pray.
Just having issues with the flu, the seasonal flu, I think some of these things will definitely, hopefully help, like Bill said, to mitigate that. And, I think like we're all saying, we'll be better prepared in the future, hopefully.
Good.
The bipolar ionization project that Bill Wade headed up, that's the one that Dan and Bill are referring to, that cleans the air. It's a remarkable system. And, it may even help students who've got asthma and allergies, that the air that they're breathing will be healthier. And so I thought that was a particularly good investment in the wellness of all the children in our care, as well as all of our staff. So I thought that was so exciting. I was really grateful that they came up with that.
So definitely positives came out of this, that's for sure.
Mhm.
A
The other thing
preparedness
I thought,
moving
you
forward.
know, we have all of that additional staff and much smaller class sizes at the elementary level. But, and you might say, well, you know, now that we have to do remote learning for a period of time, how does that factor in? And I thought that the staff to student ratio being lower for maybe those students whose families didn't opt for the online option, but they're going to be learning that way for at least a little bit. I think it will make easier to support and nurture those learners so that it will be a much better outcome than even we saw with everyone's best attempts last spring. So is that something you're seeing, Bill?
Yeah, I think just having the lower ratios are going to be helpful across the board this year for that exact reason that you mentioned. I think in schools all over the nation, there was a gap that was created last March to May. And I think, you know, with some of the things that the board is committed to and that we're doing in the district, you know, our gap hopefully will be much less than, you know, than some of the other districts may be experiencing.
So I'm just so grateful for the whole package of adaptations that were made on behalf of the kids that are Mentor School students. And so I'm very appreciative of that. I think there was a lot of wonderful partnership between you, Bill, and you, Dan, to make the financial piece of it support all of the instructional work and the safety piece. And I'm really grateful and appreciative of what you've done.
The fiscal prudence of the board over time, I have to say, gave us a lot of options this year for how we were going to respond. So I'm grateful for that.
If there are no more questions for Dan or Bill, consider a motion.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second,
Mr. The roll.
Mrs. Briner,
Yes.
Ms. Jisling,
yes.
Mrs. Hassan,
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle,
Yes,
Mr. Buckley.
Yes.
All right, thank you for that. Next up, under new business, is a discussion of the funding status of the We Care program. Bill and I have been talking, and as you know, I distributed some information this afternoon on another impact of the COVID-19 crisis is the We Care program that is running in a deficit. And I'll defer to Bill to kind of open the discussion. We did provide some financial information, but ultimately need some guidance from the board on how to go forward with this. And I think we're going to offer a couple different perspectives, Bill's perspective and mine. I don't know that one's right and one's wrong, but we have slightly different perspective on this to share with the board.
Thank you. I would like to propose, at least for the short term, continuing to pay our We Care employees, even if we do so temporarily, and using some non-general fund money to do so. While I recognize this is a program, you know, that over the years has had to be self-sustaining in our district. It's a program, it's not required to be offered, but it has served our parents and our families well for many years. I think extending the pay temporarily will do a number of things. It will prevent the filing of unemployment claims, at least in the immediate, which we would be forced otherwise to pay. It would help us to keep our staff mostly intact for when we do reopen. It would help us to better serve our families' needs for childcare. It's important to note that some of the local childcare centers have shut down. So options for families may be more limited than ever. And even some of our own employees use our childcare. And if we try to reopen and don't have staffing for all of the other areas in our district, you know, our employees can use the Family First Coronavirus Response Act to take time away, you know, from the positions, which would then end up compounding our overall staffing shortages. So these are just some of the reasons that I think, at least in the short term, it would make sense to keep, you know, keep paying them their typical wages.
Bill, do we have a sense for what's causing this deficit?
Well, back in the spring, you know, there was no week care happening from March to May, and some of the families had prepaid, and then they had to be, you know, many of those were refunded. Also, I think it's important to note a change in how we care has been charged the past year and a half. Partway through fiscal year 19 and then fiscal year 20, we care started getting charged for utilities within our own buildings. And that was done, I believe, in the spirit of cost sharing. But that was $58,347 between those two fiscal years. And they had not been charged previously to do this. And as far as I can tell, many, if not most, local districts do not charge for utilities in that particular situation. So had that not kicked in fiscal year 19 and then 20, that would show a much different result on the sheet.
I think
So,
also.
Bill, do we go? I'm sorry. Bill, do we have comparison of what we charge parents in We Care with private care facilities in Mentor?
We're from what I've gathered, we're less than some. We're less. I'm sorry. We're more than a few, but less than a lot. So I believe, and Dan could correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's $4 an hour that we're charging.
I believe that's right. And back when Bobby was still here, I think she did a quick market analysis that kind of came up with your conclusion. And Mary, I just wanted to point out also that the primary challenge right now is a revenue challenge for We Care. In 2018, 2019, we had done an incremental increase in our charge for that to absorb the cost of paying for utilities, insurance, and custodial services. So we did do an increase to cover it. Our revenue in 18-19, the last normal year, was $727,470. Last year, our revenue was $576,577. That was after refunds that Bill referred to, a decrease in revenue of $150,000 in 1 year. So we truly have a revenue problem because we're not operating at normal capacity and not able to charge for those services. So then you look, the expenses were actually down a little bit. Expenses in 2018-19 were $742,000. Last year they were $719,000. So we tried to be slightly frugal on that to do it. And again,
thank you.
So it's not a management issue. It's the reality again of the COVID-19 crisis and not being able to operate normally and have the fee income that we would normally have.
Thanks for that, Dan. Bill, along the same lines and just thinking, if we're in the same position that we were in the spring and thinking about what Willoughby Eastlake just announced that they're laying off 200 employees. Have you given thought to if we have to extend this remote learning for, say, another month or two? What are your thoughts about that as far as some of our staff?
I think if it's short term, I think for a lot of the same reasons I mentioned that apply to We Care, I think the same would apply to many of our other job classifications. I think it's important to probably pay in the short term because we would end up paying unemployment. And then when it comes time to reopen, are we going to short staff ourselves, in trying to reopen? And so, but I do understand there comes a point at which, we as a collective group would probably need to talk about what is that point at which we start to consider layoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we all kind of had that thought when we heard about Willoughby Eastlake talking about, laying off those people, but I'm with you on that. I think that, being that it's hard to get bus drivers as it is and substitutes and so forth. I agree with you on that. So I'm in agreement that we should continue to pay. It also bothers me that each month when we get our agenda, it seems like there's a lot of turnover in We Care.
Does anybody know with the layoffs in the Willoughby Eastlake School, is it majority of them are the We Care kind of people like custodians or bus drivers, or does it consist of teachers too? Anybody know?
From what I read, and this is from the newspaper, I believe it was custodians, food service, and I believe classroom assistants make up a large portion of that over 200.
I think I saw secretarial too, no, Bill?
I think that's correct also.
Yeah.
In terms of We Care, are most of those employees strictly hourly and do not get benefits? Or is there a mix?
My understanding is, and Dan could correct me if I'm wrong, is they are mostly non-benefit employees.
They are not in the collective bargaining units, either of the units, and generally they work less than 30 hours. They are not entitled to our health care benefits. And
So
I
you
would just add that
If I could offer another point of view. Again, when I was principal at Reynolds, probably about 100, we piloted the and it, was very popular and used it, but its original exception was that it was and not supported by the general fund. I'm thinking that we've had to subsidize the service program. We've had to help with the athletics and, due to COVID. And yet I'm having a problem with taxpayers' money being funded for a courtesy program that, I keep thinking of senior citizens. Parents would, support this the best they can, but we're asking our and taxpayers to support something that is a parental responsibility. So I'm wondering if this extra, if the funds to support this, are they coming from the general fund or elsewhere?
Well, if I may jump in, I think Bill's proposing to fund them from non-general fund money, which is the taxpayer money, and to use one of the special funds that we have, the Lincoln Electric annual donation, the Avery Dennison annual donation, the AT&T fund that gets cell tower royalties and rent, and then the driver's training program fees. Again, even though we've not gotten anything this year, those are 4 sources of local incomes that are not funded by the taxpayers. And collectively, those 4 funds currently have a balance of 250, 350, almost $400,000. So Bill would have the funds available, non-taxpayer funds, to absorb what's happening for now. It's not a permanent solution, but there are non-taxpayer, non-general fund dollars that are available.
It would seem that the most likely scenario would be that if we had to have an extended closure, it would be perhaps possible to reopen once the holidays are over, so that theoretically we'd have to stay remote learning through the end of the second quarter. But by the third quarter, all of the negative effects, if there's going to be additional community spread with heightened levels of infection, that should be passed, and that we'd be able to resume more normal operations for at least our elementary school students. Does that seem likely?
From the medical experts that I've been talking with, particularly at the Lake County General Health District, they believe we're going to see, I was hoping to get students back here in December. With each passing day that the numbers go up, that seems less and less likely. But the experts are saying things should start dying down after the wave of holidays. So after New Year's at some point.
That's January.
That's January. So my hope is that's accurate at worst. That's accurate. And that doesn't drag out like the March through May situation did.
So if we could continue to support those employees so that if there is improvement, you can resume normal operations, let's say January 7th or January 10th, where if those folks are laid off, that may become problematic. That you've lost people, they got jobs somewhere else because they needed the income, and we may be paying unemployment that long. So our actual savings by laying people off would be negligible, and it would cause them so much stress and harm over the holiday season.
Well,
So
with all due respect, I'm not sure I'd characterize it as negligible, that the unemployment cost is significantly less than the salary and benefits cost for the employees. There's certainly an offset of expenses, but I don't think it comes close to a full offset.
okay. Can you give us a rough percentage?
I'll have to calculate again. I will have to follow up with that. And the traditional unemployment versus the current unemployment, both with the federal subsidy and the state subsidy, that's another great unknown. But we will try to come up with some type of estimate for you.
Do we really feel that's necessary?
Can I ask a question in the meantime? So VCare is not running since March, right, Bill?
No, it's been running up until the elementaries closed last
Okay.
Friday.
Okay.
Bill, you go back to hybrid, WeCares is cut down automatically, right? With the only going 2 days a week instead of 5.
No, they're going 5 days a week, but they, at the elementaries, I'm sorry, they're going 4 days a week. At the elementaries, they have, all the students are in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday during hybrid.
But they're not only there for all 5 days. It's 20%. And then the kids Monday, Tuesday, or is it the total enrollment who's not online?
So you're breaking up a little bit, but if I understood your question, they are there 4 days a week. Any elementary student is there 4 days a week if they're in person.
Okay.
But Bill, help me, isn't the attendance down from pre-COVID?
It is down. There are some space restrictions, but not as many families are using it. We've also tried to adjust staffing accordingly. So just like, so a number of times there have been We Care openings this fall. We've not filled those positions because we've moved people around instead in order to account for the lower numbers. So we're trying to adjust, sort of like we did it for our staffing over the years on the teaching side. We're doing a much smaller version of that with our We Care staff, with the numbers that we're having this year.
So I was just thinking, and it may be a very bad idea, but at one point I'm listening, like how some of the elementary school kids' parents, they are kind of struggling because we went all remote, and they're looking for places to drop their kids, like they're looking for daycares. What are they going to do if both parents work? On the other hand, we are trying to find something for the We Care staff, and we want to keep them, I believe. And so I'm thinking, and it may be like, I know Bill and Dan, you all know all this. I'm trying to come up with a solution. Can we use our buildings while we are all remote and use the We Care staff as a daycare staff? So only those parents drop who do not have, like both parents work, drop their kids. Only We Care is going to run in the building, and the room school, like kids can Zoom in from the building. Is this a possibility? Or
I'm not sure that I would be comfortable doing that, because the whole concern I have is just the spread in Lake County, the spread in our zip code 44060, bringing any students together and staff. I just worry that we're going to contribute to the spread because of what's happening in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I know some of the schools were doing that. They actually started full remote in fall, but they were using their buildings as, if the parents don't have any option, they can just drop the kids in the building, and kids were Zooming, like taking their classes through Zoom from the building. So they were kind of like trying to keep their staff as well as, but I know there's so many other things that happen, and then our zip code is doing so great. So just a thought, sorry.
Thank you.
Bill, are you needing an answer from us on this tonight?
I think it would be good to get an answer, so we could at least know for the short term. And that doesn't mean, that doesn't lock us in, but I mean, I think just for the time being, it would be important to know if we could use some of those non-general funds to kind of help keep the We Care afloat for all the reasons that I mentioned.
So the non-general funds right now, approximately $400,000, are they earmarked for any program or usage? Are they budgeted by any line item?
No, they're Avery Dennison and Lincoln Electric have slightly different criteria, but in essence, it's at the discretion of the superintendent for, I think one, and I forget which one, may talk about enhancements or extra opportunities for students. The other is just to benefit the school district. The AT&T monies and the driver's education monies have historically been at the discretion of the superintendent as a supplemental funding source, sort of like what Bill's proposing right now, but they are not pre-allocated for any specific purpose.
We've used them over the years to help supplement things that the budget we would not have ordinarily budgeted for. For instance, Science Olympiad at the high school and the middle school have great years, and they go to nationals. And those trips to nationals could be expensive. So that's one way to help those programs pay for that. So that's an example of how it's been used over the, in the past.
Bill, didn't you use some of that parents from that 8th grade trip that got canceled because of
Yes.
by the company?
We did. That helped us in that instance, yes.
Is it possible to pay a percentage of the wages for those folks? So it's not an all or nothing, but something in between? Is that possible?
Legally, it's possible because again, they're not in a collective bargaining agreement, but I defer to Bill on that.
I mean, that's an option if the board, chose to do that, certainly.
So of the 400,000, how much are we looking at that we want to do this for the short term?
Well, again, if we look at last year, the last regular year, and then where we are now, it was over $150,000 difference. And current, as of yesterday, we have a deficit of $19,692 as far as expenses, and an absolute cash deficit. So right now they're already in the hole and need some type of solution just to get out to zero. Last year, again, it was over $150,000 difference between income and expenses. And
Dan, what part of that is the utility of expenses that we're allocating?
as Bill said, it's about $38,000 a year, I believe, is the annual amount. We phased it in with the half year 2 years ago, and this past year was that 1920 was the first year with the full charge.
The full, okay. So are those incremental costs that we've really incurred? Are they just cost sharing, so to speak, that we don't shut down the building, or do we?
No,
We turn off the heat.
it's doing a prorate. It's more of an incremental cost. We prorate on a square footage of space used solely by We Care for what portion of the day to prorate utilities and custodial expense. And as well as the insurance expense for the various liability and the property insurance, we did a proration. So they're all incremental cost.
Okay. So
Dan,
utilities are already, we pay those all the time. The insurance is something that's critical, right? That covers the employees.
Well,
That
it's the
covers our
property
butt.
insurance as well as the liability insurance, yes. And again, you'll recall we instituted this fee for the CARES program when we started the program to create a bill back. And in their case, we also bill a management fee to, in essence, be the bookkeepers to pay people and pay bills and do other things. I had conversations with Jenny Lang before she retired about doing the same thing at some point for food service, that pre-COVID-19, they were more than self-sufficient. And again, it's another tactic. It's not the biggest tactic, but it's consistent with our fiscal beliefs. It's consistent with our fiscal prudence, and it is a contributor to lengthening years between levies. And so it's not something we created just for We Care. It's
Okay.
something that we're looking at assessing for those programs that have their own independent funding source, separate from the taxpayers' levy money.
Okay, so I get it. We don't want to change how we account for our costs. That makes sense.
Well, no, and the other
That
thing,
would not be
Tom,
right.
take Garfield, for example, that dismissal was, and the We Care students and staff were. So that's an additional block of time that these are being utilized. And if they weren't there, they'd be turned off or much. So I can see the rationale for
Yeah.
charging it's past the normal day.
Okay, I
Makes
get
sense.
it. I know. I remember why we did that. That makes sense. Because
There's
Dan, you
some
brought in
additional
other
custodial.
avenues of revenue. Thinking of all the avenues of revenue that's been added to our plan over the 12 years that I've been on the board, we wouldn't want to just change one and account for it differently. And so let's maintain the way we account for the costs. But so we're deficit 19,000. We're anticipating how much of a deficit if it continues through into January? Another 19,000, 20,000,
It's-
40,000?
Our daily cost for salaries and benefits is about almost $3,000 a day. So for every day of operation, that's 15,000 a week in salary and benefits cost alone. So 15,000 a week, 60,000 a month. And that's
Bill, define short term again.
Pardon me, Ken?
Could you define the short term period again?
Well, I mean, I think there are different short-term options. We have 7 days that we're off right now. This week, the next 5 days, we're reevaluating. We understand with the numbers of COVID still getting worse. I think there's a reasonably good chance we may be off throughout the holidays. And so by my count, based, Dan, on numbers that you had shared with me, the 7 days that we're in right now would be over $16,000. 12 more days in December, if we were shut down then, would be over $28,000 more dollars. And then, it would depend. I mean, according to my numbers, based on Dan, what you had shared earlier, it's almost $12,000 a week. So I think even though with COVID cases getting worse right now, we're in the middle of the surge. I think there's a reasonably good chance we're going to be back in January. I wish I could say December, but I think there's a reasonably good chance in January. So we might be looking at a month, another month, 60,000.
So that's what you're looking. I would agree. I think we set a time ending with what we agree to, December 31st, or if we're coming back to school on January 2nd, I don't know what that date would be. Is that unreasonable to say, okay, here's what we're going to do, cover it through the end of December?
Well, we're not
Recognizing
going
that if it extends, we can't continue this because we don't know. Today, we can't say we're going to cover it till infinitum. No, right? But to say through December is really, I think, more than benevolent.
Tom, I agree with what you're saying, but I don't think we're going to return to school on the 1st of January. We've got to get through New Year's, and then you've got that 2-week period for, the incubation. So I would say middle of January at the earliest.
Well, we just can't leave the book open. We have
No,
to,
I agree with what you're
to
saying, but I'm talking
stop
about
with the
a
date.
reasonable time frame.
That's why I wondered if we could do like a slightly reduced amount and then it would be open and available, say at 85%, just to pick a number, through the end of the second quarter. If for some reason we can't resume the week care services for students by then maybe we can't continue to fund it.
Perhaps we just set a dollar limit and say, this is the way it goes. And let Dan
Well-
and Bill figure how they want to pay it, either 100% or 85%. But here's, let's say, $200,000. We approve $200,000 as the supplemental.
If we're going to look at paying a portion, then we may want to look at what they would make on unemployment and see if they would make more money on unemployment like Jenny suggested.
Well, that possibility of anybody who we give a check to, they could not work for us, but go look for a job already.
Right.
I mean, the market is already experiencing that.
Right.
The ones who went out and doubled, I'm not going to say double dip, but go out, got another check on the side in addition to the one they were getting from the government. So,
Or from us.
yeah, and it's going to happen. That's why I suggest we consider just, here's the dollar cap. And if the recipients, the We Care employees recognize that, we can't do it out to the end. We have no end in sight. We're hoping it's January. What happened?
Well, I think probably provide the most flexibility for Bill and for the administrators of the program, as there's some dollar amount that the board would support coming from these non-general fund revenues. That might provide the most flexibility for Bill as far as how long, how much is a prorated, incremental, whatever it might be.
Well, I'm agreeing. I'm in agreement with that, because we can't say, okay, go until the end. Well, it's tough to vote on something that's open book. Okay. I can vote on something that says whatever, $150,000, $200,000. And that's the cap that we said.
What
use it.
would be the total amount if we had to go, let's say, to January 15th? What would be, what's that number, Dan?
Well, it looks like Bill calculated a little more.
Yeah, he did.
Or
precisely
Bill,
than me.
what's that number, Bill?
Yeah,
Are we
Bill had a
counting,
number.
are we counting the 19,000?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that?
Yeah, whatever we've accrued so
Yeah,
far.
19,692 as of yesterday.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'd be fine if we took out the part that's for utilities and that additional cost. If we're just looking at the actual salaries paid to the employees,
Well,
I don't know if you can
in one
separate that.
sense, that's again a general fund subsidy. That's something we charge other voluntary programs. And as Ken said, back when 100 years ago or whenever he said it started at Reynolds, that it was supposed to be self-sustaining, and we are charging that to others. So,
But in this case, they're not using the facilities. Therefore, there's no utility
Well, they're not on the job either,
draw,
Jenny.
custodial costs for cleaning up.
Yeah.
Looks like I'm
well, the
frozen.
custodial costs are still the same due to deep cleaning on Wednesdays and the cleaning when they're there, whether there's half as many students or twice as many students, the daily cost to sanitize and clean those areas doesn't change much.
But if we're not in session, our custodians aren't cleaning. I don't know how their days are
Right.
apportioned, but I was just saying, if that's some small additional
And
cost,
that would be if we totally lock down the buildings and no one's in them, then yes, I would say we would adjust that incremental one. But, based on how we've operated as of today, we're still offering a program. There are still things going on in the space that We Care uses. So those incremental costs are still being incurred. But if we totally lock down and everything's remote, then yes, we should revisit how much we compute for that.
so what's the number either with or without that additional cost, Bill?
I want Dan to fact check me on this at some point later, but I think it would be close to $90,000 to cover the current deficit. And also, if take the pay out to, let's say, the beginning of the second semester, which would be through January 15th.
That sounds very reasonable to me, given the human cost, the continuity of the program, the the background checks. I mean, there's costs to all of that just to vet employees that we've accepted to work with students. You know, I would,
Dan, do we pay them for Christmas break? Winter
They-
break?
We annualize their salary and spread it over to pays, but it's based on their 185-day work year. So technically,
Okay,
they're not earning money, but they will receive a pay December 5th and 20th and January
Okay.
5th, based on taking your hourly rate times number of days times the 185 days and then dividing it in 24 pays. But they would not be earning money on that, some of those days.
Well, Ken, I know you brought up, as Dan said, something from Reynolds from 100 years ago. And I think your biggest concern was the funding for this. So
Correct.
are you okay with the proposal now that it's not coming from taxpayer money?
Long as the general fund, I want the utilities shouldn't pay for any of this. Sustaining. So I'm okay with Bill's proposal and the idea of Tom setting the debt. And then, I mean, and that's announced and due.
So are we saying that we should revisit this on January 15th if the kids are still on full remote going forward from January 15th?
I think that's fair.
What,
Oh,
I don't know that we want to say we're going to open it back up again today. We want to say, here's, the staff needs to understand, we're going to cover it to this point.
yeah.
Right.
Say, oh, on that point, we're going to look at it again. Do we want to say that? We want to set it because $400,000 may be needed for Science Olympiad going to the great state of Washington or wherever the next Olympiad is. So the employees
Well-
need to know there could be an end based upon if COVID continues till
Right.
May 31st.
all right.
And
I
I
hear
think
you
Bill
say,
can,
yeah, go ahead, Miriam.
I think Bill can handle the wording of that.
Yes.
Everybody knows that we're in a fluid situation with COVID.
Right.
And the fact that we're willing to pay them for, the next 2 months, I think is pretty generous. And then, if he wants to say, we'll relook at it in the middle of January, because at this point, the kids know that they're on remote until the 1st of December, Bill? I mean, that's a fluid situation too.
I think, Mary, that's right. Give it to Bill to make the option to reopen it. I
Let's put it
agree.
back in his corner.
Yes,
Because
Bill can reopen it.
if things worked out really well, that somehow the numbers are declining and they've got vaccines, we don't want to lose those people, so we could reopen and reinstitute WeCare on
Right.
December 12th or January 4th or whatever. So it's a contract of sorts with the people working in that capacity, that they don't go and quit and get a job doing something else and we're left high and dry.
In my mind, I think we want to support Bill number 1. Number 2, I think we want to try to hang on to as many valuable employees that we have. That, as you mentioned, Ginny, we've paid for different clearances, and they've been vetted, and they've been employees for however long. So we want to try to hang on to these people as best we can. If it's not going to cost us an arm and a leg. To me, 90,000. I think that's reasonable.
Well, and again, I'm going to be conservative because you expect me to. Bill did a high level number. He and I will have to probably crunch numbers a little bit more. I'm wondering if the board would say up to $100,000 to ensure that we cover the current deficit and those costs. And then as we're approaching those monies, then re-engage the board on recommendations on now what. But
I'm fine with that.
Perhaps give us a little bit of wiggle room and say up to 100,000 of the non-general fund monies.
And I
Is that a
think
big
for-
enough wiggle room, or should be a little bigger? I mean, we don't need to haggle over 100,000 versus 125.
I'll defer to Bill on that.
I think that should give us the wiggle room that we need, Dan, if the numbers you gave me today are accurate.
I
100,000?
we're gonna have trouble
100,000, Bill?
now, but then
Yes.
are we gonna expect to pay back this loan, or are we just and hope for the best?
Again, I don't know how we generate the revenue to pay it back. It's a revenue problem that we don't have enough billable services to do. And to Bill's point on the numbers I gave you, Bill, that's based on a daily rate of earning, not how much they get paid every twice a month. So maybe Tom's suggestion of moving this up to 125,000 to cover payroll, because again, we annualized their pay and divided it by 24 pays. And I'm a little hesitant without having some time to really crunch numbers to get real precise. But I kind of like Tom's suggestion up to 125. Understanding again, it's a revenue problem, and there's going to be no way to catch up on the revenue to pay back these monies.
And look the rates and prorate it, but that's a discussion for another. Forget I said it.
I think that's more than a fair plan, so that you're not struggling with small details when you've got so many other things to be worrying about.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I'll make a note. I don't know that we need formal board action, but the consensus is to give Bill authority to request, and then I'll put it on the board agenda, a transfer up to 125,000. We'll need some transfer in December to cover the current cash deficit, and we'll estimate the December 5th and December 20th pay. And then maybe
Good.
another request in January.
Yeah,
That
that'd be
sounds
great.
good.
That's good. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Everyone.
calling it to our attention. I would have felt badly to not have an opportunity to discuss it before you had just cut them off.
Yeah, I really appreciate Bill, because I feel Bill is the person who thinks about everybody. Like, he really cares for his staff, which I totally see in him, which is so good.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
thanks to Bill for coming up with this plan.
Yeah, I agree, Ambreen. And when I saw that in the paper about Willoughby Eastlake, I thought, we were in the same boat in the spring. And I think Bill's forward thinking on this of trying to hang on to our people is the better way to go about it. I feel like they're shooting themselves in the foot. I hate to say it, but I hope it doesn't come back to bite them.
No, I think that compassion, plus we're witnessing so many families right in our own area that are food insecure and struggling with other issues. And most everybody who works for our district is from our area. I mean, a lot of them are men or residents. So it has a ripple effect on all kinds of things, from the city income tax to our students. And so if we can do this, I'm grateful that you found another source, because I think Ken's right. We have a responsibility to account for everything to the community. So this seems like a good use of those dollars.
Okay, very good.
All right, and then the final item on our agenda is a discussion of the proposed Uptown Mentor Development Project. And as you know, from information you've been receiving and what you may have read in the paper, Ken encouraged us to reach out to the city and seize the opportunity to deepen our discussions on partnerships, on supporting each other, and recognizing the uniqueness of our fiscal situations, theirs being their primary revenue source is city income tax from employees. Ours is property tax, as we saw in some of the charts earlier tonight. And yet both recognize our responsibility to support the needs and what's best for our community collectively. And the Uptown Mentor project that we've gotten information on is provided that opportunity for some very rich discussions that I believe is going to lead to being able to follow Ken's recommendation that we create a Board of Education policy on how to consider exceptions to the norm going forward. The norm being that the city's primary development tool is the mentor incentive grants, but there are unique needs that are exceptions to that. And as we know, statutorily, this type of project would require Board of Education approval to any tax incentives provided, given the length of time and the dollar amount involved. And our discussions have been very productive with the city. It's our understanding that the city has tentatively agreed to the project itself and separately needs to develop a recommendation on the actual funding mechanism and the tax incentives that can be provided, and then present those to the Board of Education for consideration. And I think based on conversations that Ken and Bill and I have had with the city leadership and certain council people, there is a desire to work cooperatively and find a way to support this project. So I think where we are now is we don't have anything from the city asking us to take specific action, but we will get that at some point in the future. But if there's support and a commitment from the board to look favorably upon this project, depending the actual recommendation, then I think we can write some type of letter indicating that. I did provide to the board today in a chart that I developed before and sent in one of our board updates showing the initial proposal of a 30-year tax abatement with 15 years at 100%, and then incremental step downs of 75, 50, 25 every 5 years until the end of the 30 years. And I computed that based on the numbers provided and current tax rates, that the request would be that there would be abated net taxes of $805,000, new tax revenue over 30 years of $674,000. I'm sorry, that the 805 is the combined, the proposed service payment of 281,000 and proposed taxes incrementally there of 674 for a grand total of 805,000. The total abated taxes would be 1,428,000. So again, I think the indications from our discussions with the city, discussions that Ken and I have had are that we're generally supportive and recognize this is a unique project, kind of would justify an exception to the normal expectation that the city use a mentor incentive grant. But again, the formal legal process is the city develops an incentive, tax incentive program, and then presents it to the school district for consideration. And then the board ultimately would agree or ask for modifications or disagree with it. And again, based on our original understanding of the project, I think we would generally be agreeable to it, again, subject to the actual proposal. So Ken, I don't know if I did that justice as far as a summary or not, but those were my notes.
So then I just did the numbers. The abatement would be 1,428,000.
1 million, yes.
And we would receive it also 674,000 over the 30 years.
Yes,
So the net abatement or the net tax given up is 754, but we're actually going to get 674. We never would see.
That's right.
Correct.
that's correct. And again, there's two aspects to it. One is absolutely that if there's nothing that happens in that area, then there's no new tax revenues. So to that extent, supporting this project is going to create new tax revenues less than if there were no abatement. But again, with no abatement, there's probably no project that would move forward. So we would be providing support different than the mentor incentive grant that's totally funded out of city income tax revenue generated. This would be forgiving taxes that would be due and payable, but we would receive the small amount, and again, it would incrementally increase in 15 to 20, 20 to 25, 25 to 30 years. So we need to look at the 674,061 represents the current taxes that are being paid on the property as it exists today, the 10,146 that presumably would continue, but then an additional 281,000 of service payments, totaling 674,000. The total forgiven taxes would be $805,000. I'm sorry if I confused that initially. But again, there would be new revenue to the district. And the presumption is that even if nothing happened, the current taxes would be paid, although if the property ends up getting raised or goes into bankruptcy, then maybe taxes aren't paid. So
Correct. Yeah.
yes, it's to support that and hopefully some spin-off activities that I do treat this in our discussions we've had with the city as an exception, not the new standard. And I think that's very important. This is a very unique project and a very unique part of town, different than new development areas in other parts of the town, whether they're mixed use or single use. So you're right, there's something to be gained from the district by supporting it. And again, the next step is the city conceptually, or maybe actually approve the project that's being proposed. They now have to recommend to the school district an actual tax incentive program, and then for the schools to consider.
Okay.
The danger of allowing a blighted property or set of properties like this to just continue, it creates a level of risk for the prosperity of the community as a whole. And, as the Sikora's pointed out, if it was sold piecemeal, this is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity that there's this cohesive redevelopment of that whole extended block. And that's very exciting. So I think it meets all of the criteria. It helps us to develop a more robust partnership with the city. It enhances an area of the city that's blighted and has something really positive to add. So Ken's proposal to do a policy that clarifies that this is a special situation rather than, as Dan said, the new norm.
Yes.
I like it.
And the other piece is, this is to build on that relationship between and city. And Tom can speak to this, that there's been some not good working relationships in the past. So this is for us to add that value to that relationship, and do something with that god awful. I'm not driving down that road anymore. It's just so. And the other piece is, as you look around in that area, Mike and Allison have talked, these projects are catalysts for improving growth around. And, they cited some examples of what's happening around us. But I think this is our opportunity to and do something for the schools and the city. So I guess the essential question is, do we're right to show that we're working in tandem with the city and demonstrate our support for this project.
And I think the community as a whole feels so much differently about removing dilapidated structures to replace them with something lovely, rather than taking pristine areas and developing those. That has always been a frustration that I sense every time there's anything on the ballot. People don't want to ruin green space.
And
That-
I,
Go ahead, Ken.
it's is that Mike and Allison are who live in the city, and I think that's a different than proposing a project from overseas.
The other thing is that I hear a lot of residents saying is it seems like we have so many storefronts that are empty and vacant. And it seems like from their presentation to us that they've done their homework and they are presenting something that they feel there really is a need for, which if I was in the business of what they are, I would definitely be doing my homework before I'm going to make an investment like they're proposing. I'm going to make sure that what I'm building and what I'm investing in is definitely going to pull the people that they're expecting, the office people that they're wanting and the restaurants. So I feel that they do have a valuable project, not like what the residents in the city are saying. We have too many empty retail space in the city of Mentor. So
Right.
I feel like they do have value in their project.
And Allison has promised that there will be parlors in her building.
What was that?
Yeah, it's like, Ken just
Well,
breaks
not
up.
least the tattoo parlors,
Oh, the tattoos.
Oh, God.
which we have a lot of those.
We have plenty of those.
How about
Too many
another
pizza
pharmacy?
places.
We could always use another pharmacy or a car rental lot, right?
Oh,
That's right,
please.
Tom.
We could always use them.
Well, if,
I was wondering if we could poll the Mike and Allison can get a feel for, what support is for this project. At some point in time, I have to work on finances. So I think it's all know what our position is at this point in time. So dependent on once the cities finish their process.
yeah, and if I may add, Ken, you're breaking up just a little bit, that if we can poll the board for a consensus of an agreement in principle for supporting the tax incentives as proposed, subject to actual city tax incentive adoption and recommendation to the board. I think then we could write a letter to the city and to Socorro's indicating that. So I think what I understand from Ken is he would like to get some type of consensus and ask each board member if they would be comfortable in supporting that.
So Dan,
We do that.
what's the tax on the property annually that we collect?
The current tax
10,000.
is $10,146.
Okay, so that's a blip.
Covers 3 days a week here.
That's a blip.
There you go.
Are we going to be guaranteed that 674,000?
It's unless they go bankrupt or just fail to pay their taxes, yes, it would be an agreed upon amount. Again, it's using estimated appraisal values for the project that ultimately would be $4 million. So subject to the actual appraised value of the property and, you know, that they're financially viable and making the annual payments, I would say yes.
Okay.
Before we poll the board, does any questions from Mike or Allison? They can mic on and answer them if anybody has any questions.
I just had one. I recall that you were telling us when we had our work session that you had some deadlines in terms of financing and so forth. And we've gone past those. Is that creating hazards to the future of the plan?
You want me to take those?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so we've obtained some extensions. Allison, the current deadlines for the largest tract, then the most blighted tract, the far left parcel that makes up 1.1 acres, that deadline is currently the end of this month to waive all contingencies. So that's probably the property that's creating the greatest pressure from a timing perspective. And it's the most important piece of the puzzle because it's the largest in the heart of that block that is blighted. And so Allison has to waive contingencies on that by the end of the month. At that point, all of the earnest money that she's tendered becomes non-refundable. And then she has to close on that parcel by the end of the year. And she cannot do that unless she knows that she has the school board support with respect to the abatement. Those particular property owners have made extremely clear to us that they are not, they're beyond their time period that which they were willing to go, and they're not willing to go any further. There's another parcel that's very important to the equation as well. It's right in the middle. And those owners have expressed similar sentiments to Allison. She is now beyond the contingency period. Her earnest money is non-refundable on that particular parcel. She had no choice based upon the way the situation was with those particular sellers to make the earnest money non-refundable to stay in contract, or the middle piece was going to be lost, which would cause the entire development prospect to crumble. So she's put significant additional money at risk that she cannot have refunded. And she now has to close on that particular parcel by December 15th. And those sellers have said they will not, she either closes by December 15th or she is out of contract. So those are the two parcels that are creating the greatest time pressure. And because the one is right in the middle, if that is sold to someone and the one right in the middle had another offer that was tendered to it, and those particular sellers wanted to take the other offer because the other offer had a shorter time period. Even though Allison's offer was higher, it had a shorter time period. So those particular sellers actually have someone else that they could go to and sell to. And if that happens and they sell to this other user, that user will likely just put a little bit of money into that space, and the area will end up looking much the same as it does today, unfortunately, by all outside appearances. So you guys have identified very well the complexity of the equation now that's involved. And Allison is also now in contract on we talked about parking the last time we were together, and she's determined that it's really, really important to try to line up ideally two strong, but at least one really strong restaurant user for the ground floor. And restaurant user, because that has the greatest likelihood of changing people's perceptions of that area, to get a respected restaurant user that might not have otherwise come to Mentor if it weren't for this development, ideally, something that we don't have in Mentor right now. And will also attract the office workers to be able to have a good restaurant or two right there in the building. So she is now in contract on another property that would add additional parking. And then Ginny, you asked during our last get together about green space, and green space is unusual in dense developments sort of in the center of a city like this. But this additional parcel has some green space in the front that Allison would like to include some park benches and landscaping and things along those lines in that area. So she's now in contract on a fourth parcel, or a fourth owned property, which is the Citizens Bank property, which is to the right of the old Mentor Hardware property. So it's now 4 different property owners that she's in contract with, making up 6 different parcels. And we've shared that information with Ken and Dan, and provided the tax information related to those. But that additional parking that is way underutilized behind the Citizens Bank parcel will make it much less likely that she will face objections from restaurant users that would make great ground floor tenants and really anchor this development and have the greatest chance of changing people's perceptions for that area. And then also provide some complementary green space if people are waiting for a table at one of the restaurants or something along those lines. They could go sit on a park bench, which is just one building away from this development, and have green space that is there adjacent. And as part of her agreement with the city, she's agreed to preserve that building because it's a well-preserved old building in the city that looks nice, basically to maintain it in its current state. So it's sort of an eastward approaching gateway to this development. So it leans into the nicer side with the Citizens Bank building, has the old Mentor Hardware building, which she will not have part of the development, but is a nice looking building. And then the 3 buildings to the left of that are the really blighted parcels that she would be tearing down and building the building, and then utilizing some of the parking behind Citizens Bank and some of the green space in front of Citizens Bank to complement the development and just make it bigger and more attractive, and hopefully even more impactful overall for the city and the community. And just to clarify, she did present to City Council at the meeting last Tuesday, and we had multiple discussions with the city manager and the city attorney before the City Council meeting, and she did agree to and has now signed a development agreement with the city that provides all the parameters for the tax abatement as far as the city is concerned. And that's why it ended up, the story was featured on the front page of the News Herald today, because that City Council meeting was a public record, and the development agreement has images of the property in it. But this particular, the school board support, as she said all along, is absolutely essential. The project just cannot make financial sense without the school board support along the lines of what she's proposed. And I believe, based upon the discussion that we had with the city manager and the economic development director yesterday and 3 days ago, the city has all that it needs. It just needs to know that the school board, typically in these situations, we see the school board pass a resolution that says that it will support the tax abatement to enable this to go forward And we've provided a draft resolution with a compensation agreement to Ken and Dan, which is very similar to a model that was used in another Northeast Ohio community in a somewhat similar situation where there was pressure from a timing perspective, and the developer needed to know that it had both the city and the school board support to be able to move forward with continued efforts.
And if I may, I think as I indicated earlier, our intent is to write a letter of support and not take formal action at this time. Again, recognizing that legally the city has to present something to the board for consideration, but if after we poll the board, if they're agreeable, it's my understanding that it will result in a letter of support and an indication that based on what we know, the board would be inclined to approve it.
And I just, for what's worth, if it could be done where a resolution could be provided, that would give Allison more comfort because it is formal action to support the tax.
Again, we don't have anything from the city to take formal action upon. So I would not recommend to the board that they take formal action without seeing the actual proposal from the city, but can make based on, again, polling of the board tonight and their decision, it's ultimately up to them. But it would be awkward to take a formal position on something we haven't received.
And I think if it's a resolution that just says that the school board is agreeing to the terms of this tax abatement, which are subject to the compensation agreement, which was attached to that draft resolution. And then the compensation agreement is where the school board says, this is the tax abatement we will agree to subject to the development agreement that the city has entered into with the developer. It's that development agreement that spells out the parameters that Allison has to comply with to be entitled to the tax abatement in the city's eyes. But the city and Allison both need to know that the school board will provide will agree to the tax abatement subject to the terms of that development agreement that is referenced in the resolution and the compensation agreement. So that's how it all ties together.
I think with this being such a novel thing, this is the first time this has been done. I don't know if the city necessarily, they keep coming to us and saying, have you talked to the school board? What's the school board feel about this? And you're coming to us and saying, well, we're waiting for something from the city. And I think there's just a confusion somewhat and of what comes first, what happens. And then on top of all this, and we have these ticking timelines. And as you know, this is a significant investment. And we've had multiple of our lenders that we're looking at say, well, what does the school board say about it? So we're kind of, I feel like we're playing hot potato here and trying to passing it back and forth and trying to figure out what we can do to make this happen. And I can tell you, it was, as Mike had mentioned, featured in the News Herald. And of course, the News Herald had it on its Facebook page. And I'm not a huge social media Facebook page person, but I have noticed it. And it's getting a very positive response from Mentor. There's many people talking. I guess there's a Mentor community page, which I have not seen, where there's a very, very much positive response to this. So it looks like the residents are interested in it. People are excited about this opportunity. And this would be a perfect time where we can just secure the city, the school board, and the residents coming together on a very positive thing for our community. So I need to have the comfort level, as well as my lenders do, that the school board is on board. And then the city wants to know as well that, because I know there have been times where, as Ken has mentioned, the city and the school board have not had that relationship, that strong relationship in the past. So I think the city wants to make sure that they're spending their time wisely, and they don't want to take steps towards this if they don't have an assurance from the school board that you're even interested in it. So there's a lot of things there's a lot of moving parts to this. So anything you can do, ideally a resolution would make all of our lenders feel better. It it would make me feel better with this time investment, this enormous money investment. But I understand what you're saying, Mr. Wilson, and but I think the city needs some assurance too that it's spending its time wisely. So whatever we can do would be very much appreciated, just to get a sense too of the way that this project's going to go and if everybody's on board with it.
Well, I apologize if you feel that it's hot potato situation for you. I think my conversations with the city leadership and the joint meetings we had, we expressed a general support for this. Again, subject to, as you know, from the first time you talked to us, the project's evolved, as you very clearly articulated. And again, to take formal action to say we will approve something we don't have in hand is much different than saying we are supportive of it and agreeable to supporting it based on our understanding, subject to getting the actual proposal.
Dan, what documents do you feel we need from the city?
We will need something that as I understand it, there's two significant things the city does. One's a development agreement that Allison and Mike have indicated that they've taken formal action to do. The next is for the city to recommend to the school that we sign off, as we're statutorily required to do, on a tax incentive program that exceeds the city's authority to grant on their own.
Okay.
And that is, I did email Dan and Ken a draft resolution that effectuates that. It would provide the necessary assurances that both the city and the Allison as the developer would need to move forward. And it says that the resolution, by way of the resolution, the school board agrees to this particular tax abatement that's memorialized in the compensation agreement. But the compensation agreement is subject to the developer satisfying the requirements of the development agreement that she has already signed and was formally approved by the city in its city council meeting last week. So that resolution is ready to be signed, subject to the school board's approval and vote to authorize its authorized representatives to sign that resolution. This is such a complex project to be able to navigate these different contract situations and other aspects of advancing this development. Anything that you could do, the furthest you could go is authorizing the resolution, which then narrows the issues of additional things that Allison has to do, which are already challenging and significant. So as much could be accomplished tonight while we're together in this forum, so that she can really focus on the other things that she has to do to enable the development to move forward, would be greatly appreciated.
Mr. Sikora, I'm not clear. Are you saying the city has formally approved the tax incentive proposal?
It has.
All right.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
ready to be presented to the board?
The development agreement is the agreement that Allison has signed that was approved at the city council meeting last Tuesday. And that is referenced in the compensation agreement that's attached to the draft resolution that I emailed to you.
Again,
and Ken.
did the city's formal action approve the tax incentive program, or it approved the project?
Both. It approved the tax
Right.
incentive program subject to Allison meeting the contingencies that are in the development agreement. So the development agreement specifies that it's to be at least a 35,000 square foot building, mixed use, focused on Class A office. It has certain parameters in there that the city wanted to be comfortable with. And that's what Allison spent considerable time working with administration, hours and hours and hours, which Ken Filipiak, the city manager, mentioned at the city council meeting last Tuesday, to really nail down those parameters that the city would be comfortable with providing the tax abatement. And that development agreement references that the school board is contemplated to participate in the tax abatement as well. So the development agreement spells those things out. The city and Allison are just waiting for the school board. The next hurdle that she has to overcome is obtaining formal school board approval.
Again, the city has not presented us with their formal action yet. I don't doubt the accuracy of how you're representing it, but we've not received anything yet. I would propose that, again, as our board president suggested, we poll the board on, in principle, their position on this and work with the city to receive the actual formal action they have, and then convene another special meeting to consider that resolution at that point. But again, the city's not presented us anything.
So we need copies of the development agreement and the tax incentive agreement that the city has approved. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes, the city has to make a formal request for our consent to the tax incentive program. Yes. So we need that formal request, and that's part of the whole thing. And I'll be happy. I played phone tag today with Mr. Filipiak, and unfortunately we didn't connect. We exchanged emails on Friday. I will reach out to him again in the morning, subject again to the board's consensus of wanting to move forward. And if the board's agreeable, then as soon as we get the necessary certification from the city, ask that we have another special meeting.
How long would it take to get those documents, do you think?
I can't speak for the city. Hopefully not long, based on the fact they've already taken formal action a week ago tonight. I would hope they're ready, but they've not provided anything to us yet. So I don't know if they're still in the legal department or if there's some procedural stuff they have to do. I just don't know.
Well, and I would like us to be tonight and keep in abeyance that Alice a deadline, and it would relieve their angst.
Maybe we set a date for our formal board action.
It would just be a Zoom meeting, right?
Right.
Well, I mean, if Dan has been trying to get those documents since Friday, how will we know? I mean, I'm willing to set a date, but is he going to get the documents tomorrow?
I will do my darndest to get them tomorrow. If we do want to set a date, again, we need 48-hour notice for a special meeting. If the board wants to set a date, I'll one way or another connect with the city tomorrow to inform them we've established a date and ask for the information. Worst scenario would be we have to reschedule the special meeting, but happy to do all I can on my end to get the information.
And I think Allison could assist in that process too. She has the signed development agreement at the city council.
Well,
the city.
Let me work direct with the city on it. Again, sure. From a governance standpoint, the city has to deal direct with the board. So I appreciate that. And if necessary, I'll reach out, but
okay.
I would like to work direct with the city.
That makes sense.
Mike, if you want to convey, what you're conveying with us to whoever you're working with at the city, that can't hurt.
Sure. Right. Yep, we will.
Could we schedule something for Friday? Is that we just need at least a quorum?
Yeah, let's put a meet. Well, first of all, let's poll, and then let's decide on we want to set a meeting on ever. Can we do that? Dan, do I ask you to call the?
I think you can just ask each person or each person volunteer their thoughts. If in principle they're agreeable to it. Again, it's an agenda item and we could do it any way we want, but I think I can just go one by one and ask for a declaration. So we'll go in alphabetical order if that's acceptable and start with you, Mary.
You know, Dan, you and Ken are the ones that have been involved in the background of all of this in the meetings, and everything I've seen and heard has been positive. So I am all for this for all the right reasons, unless you have anything that you want to share with us that we should be concerned about.
No, I don't have anything to
Okay,
share.
then I'm for it.
All right, Ambreen.
I like the project. I'm in for that. And as Mary said, like I don't have much knowledge about the financial things, but to what I'm hearing, I feel like it sounds like a very good project for the city as well as for the school. So take my yes for that.
Okay, thank you. Jenny?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's been very warmly received. I looked at that Mentor community page, and the Wild West of Facebook was very positive. I didn't see anything that looked like it was, you know, grouchy responses. So that's so amazing. And I liked it from what I saw at the beginning. And that's an area that I've been hoping something good would happen with. This is very exciting, and I'm all for it.
Okay, Tom?
Oh, I'm definitely on board. Yeah, I'm on board.
All right, Ken?
Are you kidding? Oh, and I have to say, this is I've seen Mike and Allison's face because we've been talking through.
Yes. All right, well, then that would lead to establishing a meeting date, and I'll get to work right away on getting the information from the city, distributing it to the board, and then we can get back together and do something more formal that will hopefully be helpful to the project.
Allison, can you play this Zoom tape? It's on our YouTube channel. Say, see, they all like it. They're just waiting for papers.
So do we need to set a meeting?
Yes. If
All
you
right.
could, while we're together, that would be the simplest, or if you want to wait until I talk to the city tomorrow, but if we could do something now, that'd be great.
Why don't
No,
we
I
at
think we
least, set something. Can we do Friday?
Yeah.
I'm available Friday.
Do,
Again, I would hope it would be a short meeting that,
Sooner the better.
just the formality for the governance piece to do this.
And I'm wide open on Friday, so.
But you're not shopping on Friday?
Okay. From my computer.
Yeah.
yeah, I can do anytime Friday.
Me too.
So can I? How about you, Tom?
I just cleared my calendar Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so you pick. I'm good. Cleared my
too.
calendar. My calendar is blank. I'm
What's
good.
a good time?
Anytime for me is good.
You want to do
We
the
just need
morning?
like something.
We can do something in the morning if you want.
Because if we did the morning, then
That'll give
Allison
out
can
more
take
time.
a piece of paper that Ken signs and go to the bank. You know, I got the
you could-
broom. I got the broom.
He can run it over there right away.
Mhm.
I'm not
So
picky.
what?
Anything you can do would be great.
You know, at 10:30
9:30.
Friday morning. 9:30 is
9:30.
too early.
Dan, what time do you wake up on holidays? I know we are not
Oh,
early
gosh.
morning people.
I don't care. I'll go with whatever the majority wants. Pick
Oh,
a
no,
time.
looks like. Okay, I'll put an alarm for Friday, 9:30.
Friday, 9:30?
9:30.
9:30.
Let's do 9:30.
Okay. And
Mike,
And in the meantime, Al, if you need something in writing, would a letter help?
What do you think?
I would say if the resolution could come on Friday, that would be so much more effective.
I know, I'm just asking if there's something in the interim that So, but I'm hearing you say, let's go for the Friday.
Yeah, the greatest pressure on time frame is the current November 30th
Right.
deadline on that one contract. So it's really having the
All right.
resolution before that
Well-
deadline would be the most important thing.
Well, let's hope that the city gets those documents to
Yeah.
Ken tomorrow.
Right.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, to Dan,
Yes.
Mhm.
what we need.
All right.
And thank you all for
Yeah,
your
thank you
for your
very
kind
much.
words and your support thus far. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate
Very
it.
Good
We're
luck.
excited for you and
Keeping our
and I'm,
fingers crossed.
Me too.
yeah, we
Absolutely.
want this too, you know, we
Yeah,
all live
we do.
here. We drive down that part
Yeah.
of Manor Ave.
Mhm. We can tell. We do
Well,
too.
Ken, this wraps up our agenda then for the evening.
All right. Could I? Adjournment?
So moved.
Second,
Third,
Mr. Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Ms. Jisling,
Yes.
Mrs. Briner,
yes.
Mrs. Hassan,
yep.
Mr. Tuttle,
Yes.
Mr. Buckley.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you.
Allison and
Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you.
Hey, Ken,
Thank you.
Have a good
Good
night,
night.
everyone.
Good night.
Happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Good night,
Thanksgiving.
everyone. Have a
There.
good Thanksgiving.
Ken
Stay
Buckley, stay
safe.
on the call.
Yes.
Sue.
Ken
What?
Buckley, please stay on the call.
We have to stay on.
Ken Buckley, please stay on the call. I only need Ken.
Just
Oh,
Ken.
okay.
Mike,
Oh.
will you